The entire endeavor, Marcus decided, was a calculated assault on sanity. And he, Lord Marcus Valerius, who had counseled kings and stared down armies, was losing. The enemy was festive, relentless, and smelled faintly of cinnamon. "Okay, plan of attack," Zoe said, her voice a bright slash of color in the gray December morning. She was perched on his gigantic Gothic Revival armchair, legs tucked beneath her, a tablet glowing in her lap. Spreadsheets were involved. Marcus felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with his core body temperature. Week 1. Ambiance and gifting protocol. We need a tree, we need lights. Not the weird soul flame candles you suggested, actual electric lights. And we need to exchange our first Christmas presents. This sets the tone, so no pressure, but it's foundational. Marcus inclined his head, projecting an aura of serene confidence he had meticulously practiced in the mirror for an hour. Inside, his mind was a screaming vortex of inadequacy. Gifting protocol? Foundational? He had once received half of Wallachia as a diplomatic gift and had found it merely adequate. How was he supposed to select a single, perfect item for a woman who considered mismatched socks a form of personal expression? "Of course, my heart," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that had, on previous occasions, caused her to go delightfully flustered. "I have already procured a token of my affection, something timeless." He was, in fact, terrified. He had spent a week in the deepest vaults of his ancestral castle, sifting through treasures that had made emperors weep with envy. He'd settled on a small silver music box, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and sapphires. It was exquisite, ancient, and according to the faded scroll tucked inside, played a lullaby so beautiful it could soothe the most tormented soul. He'd conveniently ignored the second half of the scroll, which mentioned something about the soul being soothed into a permanent, dream-filled stasis. Minor details. The craftsmanship was impeccable. Zoe's eyes lit up, the spreadsheets forgotten. "Ooh, you're on the ball. I love it. See, you're a natural." He was not a natural. He was a 500-year-old predator trying to understand the appeal of inflatable snowmen. His confidence was a mask forged from pure panic. For centuries, he had navigated the treacherous currents of immortal politics with effortless grace. He could quell a rebellion with a single glance. But Zoe's bright, expectant smile? It was more terrifying than a mob of torch-wielding peasants. He could not, would not, disappoint her. The thought was more horrifying than sunlight. The gift exchange happened on a Tuesday. Zoe presented him with a box wrapped in paper, covered in cartoon dinosaurs wearing Santa hats. Inside was a thick woolen sweater, a garish monstrosity of red and green. A reindeer with a glowing, battery-operated nose was knitted into the chest. "It's an ugly Christmas sweater," she announced, beaming. "It's a tradition! You're supposed to look ridiculous." Marcus stared at the garment. He had been executed in more dignified attire. But he saw the joy in her eyes, the pure, unadulterated delight. He was the powerful, straight man character in this bizarre play, and his role was to be baffled. He could do that. "It is," he began, searching for the right word. "Luminous." "Put it on." He did. The wool was scratchy, the nose blinked. He felt his ancient dignity crumbling into dust. But Zoe clapped her hands, her laughter echoing in the cavernous, stone-walled living room. It was a sound more precious than any treasure in his vault. Perhaps, he mused, a momentary loss of dignity was a fair price. "Okay, your turn," she prompted, wriggling with excitement. With a flourish he had perfected in the court of the Sun King, he presented the velvet-lined box. His confidence, bolstered by her laughter, returned. This was a proper gift, a gift of substance. Zoe's breath hitched. "Marcus, it's beautiful." She traced the silver filigree with her finger. "It looks really, really old. It has been in my family for generations, he said, puffing out his chest slightly. The blinking reindeer nose bobbed in agreement. A trifle, she lifted the lid. For a moment, a delicate, ethereal melody filled the room. It was heartbreakingly beautiful, a string of notes that spoke of starlight and forgotten sorrows. Zoe's eyes widened, shimmering with unshed tears. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever... The melody faltered. It twisted, soured, and then descended into a guttural, demonic chanting in a language that made the gargoyles outside the window shudder. A tiny, skeletal ballerina popped up on a spring, its jaw unhinged, and began shrieking death metal lyrics about the futility of mortal existence. Zoe slammed the lid shut. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the cheerful, incessant blinking of Marcus's sweater. He stared at the box. He stared at Zoe. His meticulously constructed facade of confidence shattered into a million pieces. Zoe blinked once, then twice. A slow smile spread across her face. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed laughter. "So, a cursed music box, for our first Christmas. You know, most guys just get a gift card." "I was unaware of the modern enhancements," Marcus stammered, his mind racing. "Dream-filled stasis." The scroll meant a death metal-induced coma. The translation had been more metaphorical than he'd anticipated. "Modern enhancements," she snorted, finally losing the battle and dissolving into peals of laughter. She leaned against him, wiping tears from her eyes. "Oh my God, it's perfect. It's the most us gift ever. We can use it to scare off carolers." Marcus found himself caught in the updraft of her amusement. He had presented her with an artifact of minor damnation, a trinket of eternal torment, and she was delighted. He was so profoundly baffled, so completely out of his depth, that all he could do was stand there, a dark lord in a blinking reindeer sweater, and watch her laugh. The emotional release, he realized, came not from a grand romantic gesture, but from this shared, unexpected absurdity. He had failed spectacularly, and somehow it had been a success. This first week of Project Christmas had been a disaster, and as Zoe finally caught her breath and kissed him soundly on the cheek, he thought, with a sense of dizzying confusion, that he wouldn't have had it any other way. The scene closed on his baffled mutual understanding, the cursed box humming faintly on the table between them. The second week was dedicated to atmospheric acquisition. This, according to Zoe's color-coded chart, meant a trip to the mall. Marcus had visited markets in Constantinople, bazaars in Marrakesh, and trading posts at the edge of the known world. He was unprepared for the fluorescent-lit, cinnamon-scented sensory hell of the Northgate Galleria on a Saturday in December. "It is a maelstrom of humanity," he murmured, his senses overwhelmed. The cacophony of tinny Christmas carols, screaming children, and aggressive perfume samples was a physical assault. A veritable pit of despair. "It's the mall, you drama queen," Zoe said, linking her arm through his. "Our mission? Locate a Douglas fir, 7 to 8 feet tall, non-shedding if possible. Then, ornaments. We need a cohesive theme. I'm thinking maybe rustic woodland charm or classic crimson and gold." Marcus was thinking swift and silent extraction. He felt the predatory instincts he normally kept so carefully sheathed begin to stir. The slow-moving crowds, the dawdling shoppers, they were obstacles. Prey. He took a deep, calming breath. "I will not hypnotize the entire food court for blocking my path," he vowed internally. It would be unfestive. Their first stop was a pop-up Christmas tree lot in the parking lot. Marcus watched, bewildered, as Zoe meticulously inspected trees, fluffing their branches and sniffing their needles. "This one has a good personality," she declared, patting a slightly lopsided fir. Marcus stared at the tree. It was a plant. Its personality consisted of photosynthesis and dropping needles. Indeed, he said, faking enthusiasm. It possesses a certain stoic nobility. Getting the tree home was a logistical nightmare he preferred to forget, involving twine, his ludicrously expensive sports car, and a great deal of pine sap. The real trial began inside the mall proper, in a store called Sparkle and Spangle. It was an explosion of glitter. Zoe was in heaven. Marcus was in a personal hell. He stood awkwardly as she weighed the merits of glass unicorns versus felted gnomes. The sales assistant, a teenager named Braden with a name tag and a profound lack of urgency, was explaining the return policy on tinsel with agonizing slowness. Marcus's patience, a commodity he possessed in vast, century-spanning quantities, evaporated. "Braden," he said, his voice dropping to a low, compelling murmur. Braden's eyes went glassy. "You will cease this tedious monologue. You will lead us to the crimson and gold baubles, and you will offer us a significant discount for our troubles." "Yes, Dark Master," Braden droned, turning on his heel and marching towards the ornament aisle. Zoe smacked Marcus's arm. "Hey, no mind control on the seasonal staff. It's against the rules." "I am a lord of the night," he hissed, rubbing his arm. "I do not queue behind people debating the merits of shatterproof versus traditional glass. We have a cohesive theme to establish. The rule is you only use your powers for good, or for getting us a better table at that Italian place," she whispered fiercely. "And maybe for parallel parking. That's it. Now unzombie him." With a sigh of deep exasperation, Marcus snapped his fingers. Braden blinked, looked around in confusion, and then asked, "So, did you want the tinsel in silver, or?" The rest of the shopping trip proceeded in a similar vein. Marcus, a being of immense power and influence, was reduced to a glorified bag carrier, his every instinct screaming at him to impose order on the chaos. He bit his tongue when a woman rammed his ankles with a stroller, and merely glared when a man cut in front of them for the last box of shepherd hooks. He was doing this for Zoe. He would endure. His endurance found its limit at the mall Santa. It was Zoe's idea. "Oh, come on, it'll be a funny photo. Our first Christmas." So there he was, standing in a line of sticky-fingered children, approaching a velvet-draped throne where a man with a frankly unbelievable beard and a padded suit was ho-ho-hoing. Marcus's eyebrow began to twitch. The man's aura was entirely mundane. There was no trace of ancient fey magic, no hint of the old power of the North. He was an imposter. When it was their turn, Zoe practically skipped forward, pulling him along. "Hi, Santa. We'd like a photo." Santa beamed. "Of course. Have you two been good this year?" Marcus stepped forward. "By what right do you claim the mantle of the Winter Lord?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the festive din. The elf taking photos froze. Santa's smile faltered. Excuse me?" "I have known entities of the cold, beings who command the blizzards and ride the northern winds. You, sir, are a charlatan. Your beard is synthetic, and your domain appears to be limited to this small, poorly ventilated grotto." Zoe buried her face in her hands. "Marcus, no." "This is an affront," Marcus continued, warming to his subject. The small crowd was staring. "To usurp such a title for commercial gain. Do you even have a list? Have you checked it twice? I highly doubt your logistical capabilities." "Buddy, it's a gig," Santa said, his jolly demeanor evaporating. "I get an hourly rate plus a free pretzel. Now, are you going to take a picture, or are you going to keep questioning my mythological credentials?" "I demand to see your credentials." "Security!" the elf squeaked into a walkie-talkie. Zoe grabbed Marcus's arm, the scratchy wool of his ridiculous sweater a firm anchor in the sea of his indignation. Okay, thank you, Santa. So sorry. He's a method actor, researching a role, a very, very grumpy king. Let's go. She dragged him away as two security guards began to approach, their expressions conveying a weary familiarity with holiday-themed disturbances. He was a fraud, Zoe, Marcus insisted as she pulled him towards the exit. A complete and utter fabrication. Of course he was a fraud. He's a guy named Stan from accounting who does this every December. That's the whole point, she said, half exasperated, half laughing. You can't just go around challenging mall Santas to duels of honor. I was not going to challenge him to a duel, Marcus sniffed, offended. It would have been a summary execution. They burst out into the cold evening air, their arms laden with bags of crimson and gold decorations. The disastrous trip was over. Zoe leaned against the car, shaking her head, a smile playing on her lips. You know, she said, looking up at him, her breath fogging in the air, I don't think I've ever been kicked out of Santa's grotto before. It's a new relationship milestone. He looked down at her, at the genuine amusement in her eyes. He had, once again, acted like a creature from another world, completely misunderstood the social contract, and caused a public scene. And she was laughing. She found his utter bafflement, his ancient, rigid worldview, clashing with her modern reality, endearing. I was merely defending the honor of a venerable winter spirit, he said, a hint of a smile touching his own lips. Right. Next time, just let Stan the accountant have his pretzel in peace. He helped her load the bags into the car, the ridiculous blinking nose on his sweater casting a cheerful red glow on her face. The day had been an exercise in frustration and public humiliation. Yet, as they drove home, with Zoe humming along to a pop Christmas song on the radio, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace. He was beginning to understand. The point wasn't to execute the plan perfectly. The point was the shared chaos. The point was having someone to get kicked out of Santa's grotto with. It was a baffling, chaotic, and utterly illogical conclusion, and it felt suspiciously like happiness. Week 3 was the week of domestic horrors. Having failed at gifting and public outings, Marcus decided to focus his efforts on a more intimate, controllable environment, the kitchen. His confidence, a resilient beast, had patched itself back together. He would cook Zoe a meal, a grand, traditional, human Christmas feast. His research was, as always, meticulous. He eschewed the fleeting fads of internet blogs and television chefs, opting instead for a more reliable source, a 17th-century French cookbook he'd acquired from the estate of a disgraced duke. The recipes were complex, ingredients archaic, and the instructions assumed a level of culinary intuition that had died out with the invention of the microwave. "What is a sufficiency of larks?" Zoe asked, peering over his shoulder as he stood before the stove, wearing a black silk apron over his usual funereal attire. "And where did you even get a swan?" "One has connections," Marcus said evasively, basting the enormous bird with what the book called a unguent of spiced fats. It smelled pungent. "And the larks are a garnish. It is a feast of celebration, a culinary tapestry woven to delight the senses." His internal monologue was less poetic. The bird is not browning. It is achieving a disconcerting shade of gray. The recipe for the pottage of plums appears to be creating a form of primordial ooze. I may have miscalculated the amount of mace. He was a being who could live on blood alone. The delicate alchemy of roasting and baking was a foreign and hostile magic. But he would persevere. He would present her with a masterpiece. His first mistake was the swan. His second was Gregor. Gregor was his second in command, a vampire of considerable age and profoundly unsettling sycophancy. He had the cheerful disposition of a mortician and the fashion sense of a Victorian ghost. He materialized in the doorway of the kitchen just as Marcus was attempting to wrestle the swan out of the oven. "My lord," Gregor intoned, bowing so low his long gray hair brushed the floor. "I sensed a grand undertaking. I came to offer my assistance and bask in the glow of your festive spirit. Marcus stared at him. He had not, in any capacity, invited Gregor. But in the rigid social structure of his world, a subordinate offering fealty could not simply be told to get lost. It wasn't done. Gregor, Marcus said, his voice strained. Your timing is precise. Zoe emerged from the living room, drawn by the new voice. She stopped short, her friendly smile freezing on her face. Oh, hi, Gregor. You're here. Mistress Zoe, Gregor purred, taking her hand and brushing his cold lips against her knuckles. She subtly wiped her hand on her jeans a moment later. Lord Marcus has deigned to include me in this hallowed mortal ritual. I am overcome with gratitude. I deigned no such thing, Marcus thought, his panic escalating. He just appeared, like a bat, a very creepy, loquacious bat. But to correct him in front of Zoe would be an admission of a chaotic household, a breach of protocol. So Marcus, faking a confidence that was now in microscopic shards, simply nodded grimly. Indeed, we are pleased to have you. The meal was served, or rather it was presented. The swan sat in the center of the table, looking less like a feast and more like a casualty. Its skin was pale and rubbery, and it listed slightly to one side. The pottage simmered ominously in its tureen. The only things remotely edible were the bread rolls Zoe had insisted on buying from a bakery, just in case. Magnificent, my lord, Gregor breathed, his eyes wide with what Marcus knew was feigned adoration. A triumph of the culinary arts. This fowl, its essence speaks of a noble lineage. Zoe poked the swan with her fork. It made a sound like a wet leather glove. Its essence is speaking to me, too, she muttered. It's saying, don't eat me, I'm a health code violation. The dinner was an excruciating exercise in social awkwardness. Gregor would lavish praise on a dish, his descriptions growing more baroque and gothic with each bite. Ah, this pottage! It has the delightful consistency of freshly disturbed grave soil, and a piquancy that reminds one of the sweetest despair. Zoe would push the food around her plate, making valiant attempts at conversation that Gregor would inevitably steer back to Marcus's greatness or the glories of eternal night. So, Gregor, she tried, her voice bright with forced cheer. Got any fun plans for New Year's? Or, the next century? I plan to continue my devoted service to Lord Marcus, Gregor replied, not taking his eyes off Marcus. His plans are my plans. His whims are my sacred duty. Should he wish to watch the world burn, I shall be there to hand him the matches. Okay, Zoe said slowly. So, no party poppers then. Marcus ate nothing. He merely sat at the head of the table, a grim monarch presiding over the most disastrous state dinner in history. He had wanted to create a perfect romantic meal for Zoe. Instead, he was force-feeding his girlfriend a medieval biohazard in the company of his funereal henchmen. His attempt at control had resulted in ultimate chaos. After what felt like an eternity, Gregor finally took his leave, praising the meal one last time as an unforgettable sensory apocalypse. The moment the heavy oak door closed behind him, Zoe dropped her fork. It clattered loudly in the silence. Okay, she said, her voice dangerously calm. We need to talk about Gregor. He is my most loyal retainer, Marcus said, already on the defensive. He's creepy, Marcus. He's a full-blown, cape-wearing, yes-mastering creep. And you can't just invite him to dinner without asking me first. I did not technically invite him, Marcus argued, knowing how weak it sounded. He simply manifested. Well, next time he manifests, you can unmanifest him. This was supposed to be our Christmas, not ours plus your shadow vizier who keeps talking about the sweet perfume of decay. She shuddered. And this she gestured to the swan, is going directly into a biohazard bag. He knew she was right. About Gregor, about the swan, about everything. The evening was a smoking crater where his ambitions had been. He had tried to be the perfect host, the masterful chef, the man in control. He had failed on all counts. The foundation of his faked confidence was cracking, revealing the terrified insecurity beneath. I was merely attempting to provide a traditional holiday experience, he said stiffly. Marcus, tradition is a turkey you can actually chew, and not having to make small talk with someone who looks like he sleeps in a coffin. She stood up and started clearing the plates, her movements sharp and efficient. Which, now that I say it out loud, he probably does. He watched her, a chasm opening between them. He didn't understand her rules. He didn't understand her traditions. Every single thing he did, every grand gesture he attempted, seemed to backfire in the most spectacular way. The cursed music box, the mall fiasco, this inedible, creepy dinner. He was failing, and the fear of it was a cold, hard knot in his chest. He had wanted the week to end on a high note, a moment of triumph to carry them into Christmas Eve. Instead, it closed on the scrape of a fork against a plate and the palpable, awkward silence of his own colossal failure. The breaking point came, as it so often does, during a moment of perceived peace. It was late on the 23rd, the night after the Great Swan disaster. Gregor was banished, the remains of the feast had been disposed of with extreme prejudice, and they were finally, blessedly, alone. Zoe, in an act of profound grace, had declared a do-over. They'd ordered pizza and were now attempting to decorate the slightly lopsided Douglas fir. The cursed music box was on the mantel, silent for now. The blinking nose sweater was folded neatly in a drawer. In its place, Marcus wore a simple black cashmere jumper that did not assault the senses. The lights on the tree cast a warm, intimate glow around the room. A cheesy Christmas movie played softly on the television. For the first time in weeks, things felt normal. Almost perfect. And that was the problem. The near perfection ignited Marcus's deep-seated panic. This was it. The moment for the grand gesture, the ultimate gift that would erase all his previous failures and prove, once and for all, the depth and sincerity of his feelings. He had failed at trinkets, at outings, at domesticity. He would not fail at devotion. He watched Zoe as she carefully hung a crimson bauble on a branch, her brow furrowed in concentration. The firelight danced in her hair. In that moment, she was the most fragile and beautiful thing he had ever seen. The thought of a future without her, of her life passing in the blink of his immortal eye, was a physical pain. He saw their future not in terms of months or years, but in the grand, sweeping scale he was accustomed to. He was moving at the speed of an immortal. She was moving at the speed of a woman trying to figure out if they could agree on pizza toppings. The collision was inevitable. "Zoe," he said, his voice soft, but laced with a gravity that made her turn. He took the ornament from her hand, his cold fingers brushing against her warm ones. "What's up?" she asked, her smile a little wary. She recognized this tone. It was his grand pronouncement voice. He led her to the window, which overlooked the snow-dusted, moonlit grounds of his estate. It was a hopelessly romantic backdrop for a hopelessly misguided idea. "We have faced trials," he began, because he couldn't help but be dramatic. Music boxes of questionable origin, charlatans on velvet thrones, foul of a regrettable nature. She laughed, a real, gentle laugh. "You can say that again. It's been a weird month." "But through it all," he continued, turning to face her, taking both of her hands in his, "my regard for you has only deepened. It has become a certainty, an anchor in the chaos of this festive season." "Marcus, that's really sweet," she said, her expression softening. This was good. He was on the right track. He took a deep breath. This was it, the ultimate gift, the one she couldn't possibly misunderstand. I find myself contemplating an eternity of such moments, he said, his voice dropping to a resonant whisper. An endless succession of Christmases, with you by my side. There is only one way to ensure such a future, one gift I can offer that eclipses all others. Her eyes widened slightly. She was likely expecting jewelry, a car perhaps. Her mortal imagination was so charmingly limited. Zoe, my heart, he declared, his voice thrumming with sincere, catastrophic emotion. I want to give you the gift of immortality. I will turn you. We will spend forever together, starting now. The silence that followed was not the odd, tearful silence he had pictured. It was a thick, heavy, horrified silence. Zoe slowly pulled her hands from his. Her face had gone pale. You want to what? She whispered. I will make you like me, he clarified, just in case the nuance had been lost. Immortal, powerful. We will be equals, bound together for all time. He had expected joy, maybe a little shock, followed by acceptance. He had not expected the look of pure, unadulterated panic that was dawning on her face. Turn me? She squeaked, taking a step back. Turn me into a vampire? Marcus, are you insane? I wanted to see if we could survive one holiday. I was worried about whose parents we'd visit next year, not which millennium we'd celebrate our 500th anniversary in. His carefully constructed romantic scene crumbled. But it is the ultimate expression of my devotion. It's the ultimate expression of you not listening to me at all. Her voice rose, laced with a hysteria he had never heard before. We are not moving that fast. I still don't know your social security number. I don't even know if you have one. We are in the let's see how this goes stage of the relationship, and you just skipped ahead to let's commit to an eternity of bloodlust and avoiding direct sunlight. I wanted to see if we could agree on pizza toppings, Marcus, not eternal damnation. Every word was a blow. He felt his face, his composure, everything, just fall. The bafflement that had been a source of humor was now a source of deep, cutting pain. He truly, fundamentally, did not understand. I believed this was what you desired, he said, his voice hollow. A grand romance. I want a normal romance, with a weird vampire twist. I don't want to skip all the steps. The first Christmas, the first vacation, the first time we meet each other's friends without your creepy butler lurking in the shadows. You're trying so hard to give me this perfect, epic love story that you're not even here for the actual, messy, real one. So everything I do is wrong? The hurt was raw in his voice, the centuries of pride stripped away, leaving only the wounded insecurity he'd been hiding. The gift was a curse. The shopping was a disaster. The meal was a monstrosity. I try to offer you my very existence, and that too is a mistake. Nothing I do is good enough for you. That's not what I'm saying. It is precisely what you are saying, he retorted, his own voice rising, the cool control finally snapping. I have navigated the fall of empires with more grace than I have this single ridiculous holiday. I lay my heart, my future, my very nature at your feet, and you recoil as if I have offered you another one of my culinary experiments. The fight was ugly and real. The jokes were gone. The witty banter was replaced with sharp, painful truths. He saw her fear and frustration, and she saw his raw, desperate hurt. They were two people from different worlds, speaking different languages, who had been getting by on laughter and physical attraction. Now, faced with a real, fundamental difference, the bridge between them collapsed. I can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. It's too much. Then perhaps I am too much, he said, the words tasting like ash. The pain of her rejection was sharper than any steak. He had offered her everything, and she had thrown it back in his face. He felt like a fool, a monster, a failure. Without another word, he turned. The air crackled around him, a tangible wave of his misery and power. He didn't walk to the door. He simply dissolved into shadow and flowed out of the room, leaving Zoe standing alone in the warm, festive glow of the Christmas tree, the romantic scene now a battleground. He was gone. And as the silence of the huge, empty house settled around her, Zoe had the terrible feeling that he wasn't coming back. Christmas Eve was a study in silence. The great stone castle, which had felt cozy and full of chaotic potential just 24 hours earlier, now seemed vast and tomb-like. Zoe wandered through its halls, the echo of her own footsteps her only companion. The half-decorated tree stood in the living room, a monument to their spectacular implosion. A single crimson bauble lay on the floor where Marcus had dropped it. She sank onto the sofa, pulling a thick blanket around her shoulders, though the chill she felt was more than just physical. She had replayed the fight 100 times in her mind. His hurt, wounded eyes. The desperation in his voice when he'd said, "Nothing I do is good enough." And that was the part that twisted in her gut. Because he had been trying, so hard, too hard. He was a 500-year-old immortal being trying to navigate a mortal tradition he couldn't possibly comprehend. All for her. He'd approached it like a military campaign, with research, grand strategy, and dramatic gestures. And every time, the modern world had conspired to make him look ridiculous. He'd bought a cursed box because it was beautiful and ancient, not because he wanted to inflict death metal on her. He'd argued with Mall Santa because, in his world, titles and domains were matters of life and death. He'd offered her immortality because, to him, that was the only logical, permanent way to say, "I love you." He wasn't trying to rush her. He was trying to secure her. He was terrified of losing her, so he'd tried to give her the one thing he thought was truly valuable: time. An eternity of it. Her panic, her rejection, to him it must have felt like she was rejecting not just the offer, but him, his very nature. She picked up her phone and called her best friend, Sarah. "He offered to turn me into a vampire," Zoe said, without preamble. There was a pause on the other end. "Okay, wow, that's a big third date kind of move." "It's our first Christmas," Zoe wailed. "So what did you say?" "I kind of freaked out and yelled at him about pizza toppings, and he vanished in a puff of gothic angst." "Ah, the classic puff of gothic angst. Never a good sign," Sarah said sympathetically. "Look, is it crazy? Yes. Is it also, in a deeply weird and slightly terrifying way, the most romantic thing you've ever heard? Also yes. He's not offering you a weekend in Napa, Zoe. He's offering you forever. The guy's clearly head over heels." "But I'm not ready for forever. I'm still trying to get him to understand that you can't just hypnotize the cable guy to get a better installation window." "So tell him that," Sarah said simply. "Tell him you want the messy, stupid, normal stuff first. Tell him you're not saying no to forever, you're just saying yes to next Tuesday. He's old, not stupid. He'll get it. If he comes back." "If he comes back," Zoe repeated, the words hanging in the air. She spent the rest of the night curled on the sofa. She didn't sleep. She just watched the snow fall outside the massive arched window, each flake a tiny, perfect piece of a world he no longer seemed to be a part of. The warmth and humor of the past few weeks felt like a dream. All that was left was the cold, hard reality of his absence. She had wanted a messy, imperfect Christmas. Now it looked like she was going to get a lonely one. Christmas morning dawned cold and bright. Sunlight, the enemy of her beloved, streamed through the windows, making the dust motes dance in the air. The silence was absolute. He was gone. The finality of it settled in her stomach like a stone. She pushed herself off the sofa, her joints stiff. She would pack her things, go back to her tiny apartment that didn't have gargoyles, and try to forget the whole disastrous, wonderful, heartbreaking affair. And then she saw it. On the floor, right in the center of a sunbeam he would have so carefully avoided, was a single folded piece of heavy parchment. His name wasn't on it, but she knew. His flair for the dramatic was a signature in itself. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The note contained only 4 words, written in an elegant, archaic script. "Meet me where it's quiet." She knew where he meant. There was a small, secluded clearing in the woods behind the castle, a place they'd discovered on a walk one autumn afternoon. A place where the only sound was the wind in the trees. She threw on her coat, boots, and scarf, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ran out of the castle, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. The air was crisp and clean, and the world was blanketed in a perfect, pristine white. She saw him from a distance. He wasn't brooding or striking a dramatic pose. He was just standing by an old stone bench, wearing a long, dark coat, watching the snow fall. He looked lost, smaller than he usually seemed. Not a dark lord, but just a man. She slowed as she approached, her breath pluming in front of her. He turned, and his eyes met hers. The raw hurt was still there, but it was joined by something else, a deep, profound remorse. The jokes stopped. The banter was gone. There was only sincerity. "Zoe," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "I am sorry." "Me too," she whispered. He took a step closer. "I have spent the last day and a half in contemplation. I replayed our conversation, your words, especially the ones concerning pizza." A small, watery smile touched her lips. "Yeah?" "I have been a fool," he said, and the admission seemed to cost him dearly. "I approached this entire season and our relationship as a problem to be solved, a victory to be won. I saw your mortality not as a beautiful, fleeting part of who you are, but as an obstacle to be overcome. My fear of losing you made me tyrannical." He looked down at his hands. "I have existed for 500 years, Zoe. I do not know how to love in small measures. I do not understand taking it slow. My feelings for you are vast, eternal, and I tried to force them into a shape you would recognize. It was arrogant, and it was wrong. I was not giving you a gift. I was giving you an ultimatum, born of my own terror." The vulnerability in his confession was breathtaking. The powerful, confident Lord Marcus Valerius was gone. In his place was this man, admitting his fear, admitting his failure. This was the man she was falling in love with, the one behind the grandeur and the gaffes. "I'm sorry too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have seen how scared you were. I was so focused on how overwhelmed I felt that I didn't see how terrified you were of messing it up. You were just trying to show me you loved me, in the only way you knew how." "I do love you," he said, the words simple and devastatingly sincere. "And I will learn. I will learn your measures. I will learn Tuesdays, and pizza toppings, and the correct protocol for dealing with fraudulent winter spirits." The warm, earned, quiet moment of sincerity settled around them, more powerful than any joke or grand gesture. This was the catharsis, not a punchline, but a shared, quiet understanding. "Okay," she said, stepping forward and finally closing the distance between them. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in the cold wool of his coat. He held her tightly, as if he was afraid she might fade away. "Okay, we can learn together." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other in the quiet of the snowy woods. The fight was over. The crisis had passed. After a while, Zoe pulled back, a mischievous glint in her eye. "So," she said, "what now? I don't think either of us is up for attempting a Christmas dinner." A faint smile touched his lips. "No, I believe my culinary career is officially over." He looked around at the pristine snow. Perhaps a different tradition, a simpler one. He bent down and scooped up a handful of snow, packing it into a ball. He looked at it, then at her. "We could construct an effigy," he suggested. "A man of snow." "A snowman," she corrected, laughing. "Yes, let's build a snowman." They set to work. It started out normally enough. They rolled 3 large balls of snow and stacked them. But Marcus, with his vampire strength and ancient Gothic aesthetic, couldn't help but add his own unique touches. He packed the snow with such density that it took on the gleam of polished marble. When it came time for the arms, he eschewed normal twigs in favor of 2 gnarled, claw-like branches he snapped from a dead tree. For the eyes, he found 2 sharp black pebbles and pressed them into the head at a severe, menacing angle. He used another sharp stone to carve a mouth, which came out looking less like a smile and more like a leering, jagged snarl. They stepped back to admire their creation. It was, without a doubt, the most demonic-looking snowman in the history of winter. It didn't look jolly. It looked like it was about to command an army of the undead to lay siege to the nearest village. Its twig claws seemed poised to snatch unsuspecting carolers. Its pebble eyes glared out at the peaceful winter wonderland with pure, unadulterated malice. Zoe stared at it. Marcus stared at it. The silence stretched. Then a small chuckle escaped Zoe's lips. It grew into a giggle, then a full-throated laugh. The sound was pure joy. Marcus looked from the demonic snowman to her laughing face, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his own. He started to laugh too. A deep, rich sound that she had never heard before. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a wry smirk. It was real laughter, born from the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the moment. Here they were. After a month of failed gifts, disastrous outings, inedible food, and a relationship-ending fight, they stood in the snow on Christmas morning, laughing their heads off at the terrifying snow demon they had created together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't traditional. It was weird and a little bit scary and completely, utterly theirs. "He's beautiful," Zoe gasped, wiping a tear of laughter from her eye. "He has a certain gravitas," Marcus agreed, his arm sliding around her shoulders, pulling her close. They stood there together, their laughter softening into contented smiles, admiring their monstrous creation. The path to this moment had been a catastrophe, a comedy of errors from start to finish. But they had found their way through it. They had learned that love wasn't about grand, perfect gestures. It was about shared laughter in the face of spectacular failure. It was about arguing with Mall Santa and surviving a cursed music box. It was about finding the sincere apology after the stupid fight. It was about building one demonic-looking snowman together and knowing, with absolute certainty, that even if it was messy and imperfect, it was real. And it was just the beginning.